Hey guys, welcome back for another video. Today we're going to be talking about how to improve at Beyblade, specifically with sort of rogue picks. It's very easy to take sort of top tier meta parts and do relatively well with them. It's a lot harder to do it with sort of picks that are not considered sort of the top of the tier in terms of performance. So I'm going to talk about sort of, my thoughts on that, how you can improve, and basically what I do, which is not all that interesting to watch, but it's how I practice. So obviously, I do a lot of videos with Leon Claw. I've taken it to tournaments. I'm kind of hard stuck on it. It's basically become synonymous with my channel at this point, and I actually spend a lot of time practicing with it. It's probably the blade that I use the most, and I sort of want to talk about how using something consistently, using it often, is going to help improve sort of your odds of winning. It's going to get you sort of used to sort of how the blade performs, the physics of it, like what the different parts do to it. Basically trying to optimize your ability to win despite the blade not being the most top tier or the easiest to use perhaps. So when testing or posting videos or even like going to tournaments, I occasionally get people that are surprised that I'm able to get the results that I do, specifically with Leon Claw, but this sort of applies to any sort of rogue pick. If you get super used to something, I sort of like compare it to like a video game. Eventually you sort of get used to the physics of what you're using, and you sort of understand how it interacts with the stadium, what its stamina is like, the best points for contact on the blade in order to, get a KO or a burst or whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. And, a video game is the same sort of thing. Like, you really have to, regardless of what kind of game it is, you really have to practice in order to understand the way the character controls or the physics of the game, whether it's a fighting game or Fortnite or a racing game or a sim or whatever. Like, you have to get used to the way that game is programmed, the way that those physics, are programmed in. And the same thing applies to real life. When you have a game that is all about physics, you have to get used to what you're using, and everything's going to handle differently because of weight distribution, because of the size, because of the shape. So it's important to, if you really want to like master something, you have to practice with it. It sounds silly, I think, probably to some people because we're talking about Beyblade, but this applies to other hobbies as well. If you look at yo-yoing, for example, this is another sort of physics-based hobby that takes a lot of skill and a lot of practice to get really good at, a lot of coordination. Obviously very different from Beyblade, but same sort of idea sort of applies here. Like, you could buy an expensive yo-yo, but it's not going to make you good at yo-yoing. You can get online and look at, a top tier deck or top tier combo, and you might do pretty well with it, but I don't know that it's going to increase your skill level just because you went online and found a good combo. So there's a reason why there's a lot of players that regularly do really well in tournaments, because they spend a lot of time practicing with Beyblade, testing different combos, honing in on the combos that they use, understanding their launching and things like that. And I think that's important. Like, a lot of people just assume, oh, you just, you build a combo, launch it in and hope for the best. But, there's something to be said about the repetition of trying to get a specific thing to happen. Like, let's say you're launching a very particular way and you're trying to reproduce the interaction in the stadium just about every time. This is, much easier to do when we're talking about Metal Fight, where you've got a very round sort of stadium where you can sort of angle your launch and you can get a flower pattern, but you still have to practice in order to get that consistent. It's harder to get consistent launches in the X Stadium because there's so many variables, especially with the dash line and the shape of the stadium, but it's still possible to get very similar sort of launch patterns or interactions with the stadium. Obviously, you can't factor in how your opponent's going to launch, but you can go in with the intention of trying to get a specific interaction out of your launch. And I think as sort of Takara and Hasbro are really pushing the competitive aspect of Beyblade, I think we're going to see the skill gap sort of start to change for Beyblade. It's a lot easier to play much more casually and do fairly well in the past because competitive wasn't as huge as I think it's going to be for X. If you look at like trading card games, for example, like Yu-Gi-Oh or Magic or Card Fight Vanguard or even Pokemon or Digimon, you have a massive skill gap from a casual player to somebody who is playing competitively at at their locals or even at a state level or a national level. The skill gap increases the higher up you go, and the only reason that that exists in the way that it does is because there is a scene for competition. In the past, for Beyblade, specifically for Beyblade outside of the Asia regions, it's been much harder to compete competitively because there haven't really been official tournaments, or there haven't been official tournaments that have been open to all age brackets. So I think with the introduction of a far more accessible competitive scene, I think we're going to start to see people really spend a lot of time trying to get really good at Beyblade. So I think it's going to be important moving forward to really invest time into getting good at launching, getting good at combo building, getting good at testing. And like I said, I really like rogue picks. I'm sort of the same way with all of my hobbies. Like I play Yu-Gi-Oh as well, and all of my decks are rogue decks. Like I don't really well, one, it's too expensive to keep up with the meta, but I don't really try to go out of my way to keep up with the meta. If I like something, I want to use it. So I spend a lot of time trying to get as good as I can with the stuff that I like to use rather than the stuff that I think is the best pick competitively. And I also think that sometimes that helps too, because a lot of people don't spend a lot of time testing against rogue picks. So they don't really understand, they don't know what it's good against, they don't know what it's not good against. So you can, show up with a bunch of rogue picks and they have no idea how to orient their deck because people don't use them. So you can kind of get sort of a one-up, advantage-wise, especially if you're really good with these rogue picks, to sort of surprise your opponent and potentially get an advantage just because they don't know how to orient their deck. And maybe you get a better matchup because they haven't tested against those things and you have. So I do think it's important to thoroughly test. This is, all this background footage of me is just sitting down and just practicing against Wizard Rod with Leon Claw because I know it doesn't do great against it. So I'm going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to optimize my chances of beating it because I know people are going to run it at a tournament. And so I think it's really important to practice because there's so many variables in Beyblade. So if you want to you can get really good at launch, you get a really strong launch, but a strong launch doesn't always mean that you're going to win the match. It's very easy to self KO in X if you launch too hard, especially if you flat launch as hard as you can. Very good chance that you end up self KOing, and obviously you don't want to do that. You end up losing points that way. So I've spent a lot of time trying to get used to the blades that I pick for my decks or whatever, how they interact with the stadium, how the bits that they're on interact with the stadium. That's very important as well because the different weight of the blade is going to dictate how it interacts with the stadium. The different bits are going to change how they interact with the stadium. Obviously, a flat bit is going to perform very differently than a ball bit. Same thing with the variance of flat. Flat and low flat perform differently. Taper and unite perform differently. Gear flat, gear point, they all have a different interaction with the stadium, and depending on which blade that you have on your combo, that's going to change it as well because of weight distribution, because of overall weight. It's just going to change how the blade interacts with the stadium. So if you're building a deck, I think it's very important. Let's say you have a couple combos that you really want to use. Very important to practice pretty heavily with those combos because they're just not going to perform the same. Drawn Sword and on flat and Phoenix on flat are not going to perform the same. They have the same bit, but their weight distribution is different. Their overall weight is different. Their recoil is going to be different. So it's important when you're deck building or when you're picking combos to take to tournaments or to practice with, to get used to how they interact with the stadium. And I spend more time doing that than I think anything. Obviously, I do a lot of combo testing, especially when new parts come out. But I spend a lot of time behind the scenes just practicing launches, just really trying to understand interactions with the stadium. I spend more time just practicing launching than anything else. And I think that's one of the reasons why I can make Leon Claw work. You know, I've had pretty good results in tournaments, and obviously my test results for Leon Claw have been a lot different than other people's. But that's because I spend so much time with it. I really feel like I've gotten a pretty good handle on how it works in the stadium, and I feel like it's improved my ability to win with it. So, kind of a rambly video, but I kind of wanted to talk about it because I don't think that this is a topic that a lot of people talk about when it comes to Beyblade. You know, it's mostly just launch hard and build a meta combo. But I think there's way more variables that a lot of people aren't considering when we're talking about competitive Beyblade. So anyway, I'm interested to know everyone's thoughts. I want to know what your favorite Beyblade X combo is. It can be meta, it can be non-meta. Let me know your favorite combos. I'm interested to know what everyone's favorite blade is, what everybody's favorite combo is, what you guys have spent the most time with. Certainly mine is just Leon Claw. I've spent an obscene amount of time just practicing with this Beyblade by itself. I probably need to spend more time with some other blades actually. But yeah, anyway, hit the like for the algorithm, subscribe if you haven't already for future Beyblade content, and I will see you all in the next one.